Flight attendant told her, "You don't belong here." Minutes later, CEO called her Ma'am. Janelle Carter stood at the entrance of JFK's VIP lounge, the lights dim and the soft hum of murmured conversations filling the air. She adjusted, her scarf ensuring it covered her hair just right. The black hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers were deliberate choices. Comfortable. Incognito. Her assistant had already handled everything. Check-in, ticketing, the VIP access, everything was arranged to avoid attention. Janelle wasn't here to be seen, not today. The moment she stepped into the lounge, the gate attendant's eyes followed her. It was a quick, calculating glance, then an unmistakable look of judgment. Janelle ignored it, heading straight for a corner seat by the window, but she couldn't escape the feeling. She'd felt that gaze too many times to ignore it. Flashbacks flickered like lightning. School hallways where people moved out of her way, boardrooms where her suggestions were skimmed over, and crowded elevators where her presence wasn't acknowledged until it was time to take the trash out. She'd been invisible, or worse, an inconvenience. Today was no different. The attendant approached her. "You must be lost," the woman said, her tone sharp but feigning politeness. "This is for first-class passengers only." Janelle turned her gaze to the woman, holding it for just a second longer than normal. "I'm on the list," she said simply. The attendant's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. She moved away quickly, muttering something to herself. Janelle exhaled, staring out the window, fighting the tension that had suddenly knotted in her chest. Something about today felt different. Something inside her shifted. She wasn't in the mood to tolerate the usual judgments, the subtle racism, or the dismissive treatment she had learned to bear with grace. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, clear as day. "You'll walk in rooms they think you were sent to clean." She was so tired of it. Tired of playing the part, the invisible worker who did the grunt work, who wasn't expected to have a seat at the table. Tired of bending, of being underestimated. Her grandmother had been right. Janelle had walked into countless rooms where people looked past her, where she was treated like a nobody. But that would change. It had to. The lounge was filling up now, and Janelle kept her eyes on the glass, trying to steady her pulse. The reality of her situation wasn't lost on her. She had a meeting in LA tomorrow. That could change everything for her company, for herself, for her legacy. It was a quiet power she had built, brick by brick. No one could see it, but it was there. Her phone buzzed. Reminder: CEO Blake is awaiting your arrival. A slight smile tugged at her lips. She had the power to take the reins today. No one would underestimate her again. Her grandmother's words came back once more. "You're not invisible. You never were." Janelle stood in line at the gate, waiting her turn to board the plane. Her eyes fixed on the monitor that flickered with flight information. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos. Families, business people, a few vacationers, all moving with a purpose. Janelle felt disconnected from the frenzy, like a quiet observer in the middle of a storm. She shifted the strap of her carry-on and adjusted her scarf, pulling it a bit tighter. It was a habit now, a reflex to make sure no stray strand of hair escaped from under the soft fabric. Her mother's scarf. The one she'd passed down to her when she was just a girl. Her mother never flew once, never even set foot in an airport. It always stung to think about that. Her mother had always dreamed of traveling, but the world had never felt open to her. Now Janelle wore the scarf, wrapping herself in it as a silent promise to do the things her mother never could. As she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, she heard footsteps behind her. Then a voice cutting through the quiet buzz of the crowd. "Excuse me, ma'am. This line is for first-class passengers only." Janelle didn't even turn around. She knew who it was. Carla, the flight attendant, with her platinum blonde hair and her too polite tone that dripped with condescension. Janelle had seen her many times before, but today felt different. Carla's voice was louder than usual, enough to make a few heads turn. Janelle didn't flinch. She kept her posture tall, her shoulders back, and looked at her ticket in her hand. Slowly, she handed it to Carla without saying a word. Carla glanced at it, her eyes flicking back to Janelle's face. Her lips curled into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Must be a mistake," she said, looking at the ticket like it was something she didn't want to touch. The words stung. Humiliation crept up her spine, crawling under her skin like fire. But Janelle said nothing. She wasn't going to give Carla the satisfaction of seeing her upset. The ticket was clear. Her name was printed neatly in bold letters. First-class passenger. Business class. She was where she belonged. Before Janelle could respond, a voice from behind her cut through the tension. "She might be with someone important," a man said. His voice was deep, with an air of authority. Janelle glanced over her shoulder. Businessman in a suit with salt and pepper hair gave her a look that was somewhere between pity and curiosity. It was a small moment of unexpected solidarity from a stranger, but it wasn't enough to dull the sting of Carla's words. Carla hesitated, then gave a tight nod, her expression faltering. She didn't apologize, didn't back down. "Fine," she muttered, turning to another passenger who was already making their way to the counter. Janelle's hand tightened around the scarf. Her mother had never even had the chance to sit in first class. She had worked every day of her life, never even thinking of taking a flight. Now here Janelle was, standing at the gate for a first-class seat, treated like she didn't belong. Her heart raced, but her exterior remained calm as she could manage. This was just one more fight, one more person trying to take something she had earned. "Thank you," Janelle said softly to the businessman, still clenching her mother's scarf. He nodded, and she could see the recognition in his eyes, a brief moment where he realized the weight of the situation. He didn't speak again, but he gave her an almost imperceptible smile before stepping forward to board. Janelle stepped forward too, and this time, Carla didn't stop her. The line was moving now, and with a small, quiet victory, Janelle passed, through without another word. But the words of the flight attendant echoed in her mind. Must be a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Janelle belonged here, and no one could take that from her. She wrapped the scarf a little tighter around her neck, letting the fabric of it settle against her skin like a shield. The cabin doors opened, and as she stepped on the plane, she thought about her mother, about the sacrifices she had made, and how she had promised her that she would rise above the challenges. This was just another hurdle, and today, Janelle would rise. She had come this far, and nothing, no one, was going to make her feel small again. She walked toward her seat, head held high. Janelle settled into her seat in 1A, the first-class cabin a sanctuary of quiet luxury. The plush leather seat seemed to embrace her, a stark contrast to the rigid plastic chairs she had grown accustomed to over the years. She adjusted the scarf around her neck and smoothed the fabric of her dress, doing her best to settle into the silence of the private space. But the silence was far from comforting. It felt like a weight. Carla, who had accompanied the passengers to their seats, lingered near the front of the cabin, glancing over her shoulder at Janelle every few seconds. The flight attendant's eyes were sharp, filled with judgment. There was no mistaking the look. Carla was still sizing her up, still unsure whether Janelle had earned the right to be in that seat. It was the kind of scrutiny Janelle had come to expect, the kind of unspoken challenge that made her feel like she was constantly proving herself. The other first-class passengers avoided eye contact. A few glanced up at her from their magazines or laptops, but quickly looked away. They seemed uncomfortable, as though her presence, her black skin, her confidence didn't quite fit the image of privilege they were used to. A few looked at their phones, pretending not to notice the subtle tension hanging in the air. Janelle let out a slow breath, staring out of the window. The jetway had already disappeared, and the plane had begun to taxi toward the runway. The engines hummed. To life, a low rumble that reverberated through the cabin. She watched the ground below, the blur of concrete and asphalt, and it reminded her of those early days. The days when she had been dismissed as just a temp in finance. The days when she was spoken over in meetings. Her ideas ignored because she was a woman, because she was black. She remembered the men at the table, their eyes gliding past her like she didn't exist, like she wasn't worthy of speaking. She'd learned quickly how to sit quietly, how to make herself small when the boardroom felt too big, too foreign. She'd learned to pick her battles, speak up too much, and she'd be labeled as difficult. But it had all changed. Slowly, steadily, she had made her mark. She had risen through the ranks. She had learned to walk into rooms where people didn't expect her to be, rooms where they thought she should be cleaning, not leading. Janelle inhaled deeply. The engines roared as the plane began its ascent. She watched the ground fall away. Beneath them, the buildings shrinking to tiny dots. Her heart beat a little faster, not from the rise of the plane, but from the weight of the moment. She'd come this far. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus. She looked down, her thumb swiping, the screen to reveal the message from her assistant. CEO will meet you at LAX gate. He knows. She blinked at the text, her pulse quickening. The CEO, the one who had called her personally last week, asking to meet. She had played it cool, kept her distance, but now it was real. She was finally meeting him. He knew. He knew she was the one behind the deal. The message weighed on her mind, but it also carried an undercurrent of something else. Something deeper. Something that made her question everything. She thought about the silence she had endured, the looks she had received. Carla, the passengers. Had they really believed she didn't belong here? Would the CEO see her for who she really was, or would he too be just another person who underestimated her? She clenched her fists, feeling the cool steel of the armrests. Under her palms, she could speak up now, call out the injustice of it all, demand respect from Carla and the others around her. She could confront them, make a statement about who she was and how far she had come. But she wasn't sure it would change anything. Sometimes, silence carried more weight than words ever could. Janelle turned her gaze out the window once more, watching as the city below disappeared into the vast expanse of clouds. She would let the silence linger, let it carry the sting. For now at least. When the plane landed, when she met the CEO, then she would speak, on her terms. The plane leveled off as the clouds parted, revealing a vast stretch of sky bathed in twilight. The rhythmic hum of the engines became a steady background to the quiet around her. Janelle adjusted in her seat, her gaze fixed out the window, lost in thought. But before she could fully immerse herself in her own swirling mind, a soft voice broke through the calm. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," the voice said, warm and gentle. Janelle turned to find the elderly woman beside her, Mrs. Gwendolyn, looking at her with kind eyes. Her white hair was neatly pulled into a low bun, and her soft, wrinkled hands rested on the armrests. Despite her age, there was a quiet power about her, a steady grace that immediately put Janelle at ease. "I've had a long day," Janelle replied, offering a polite smile. "Just trying to make sense of some things." Mrs. Gwendolyn nodded, knowingly. "I can tell you carry it in your eyes, dear, but you don't need to carry it alone. Sometimes sharing the weight makes it lighter." Janelle hesitated. The words felt familiar, but they didn't quite reach her. She had carried weight her whole life, always having to prove herself in a world that seemed set up for everyone but her. But there was something in Mrs. Gwendolyn's voice, an assurance, a quiet confidence that made her want to listen. "What's on your mind?" Mrs. Gwendolyn asked gently, leaning in slightly. Janelle sighed, her shoulders heavy. "It's this whole thing, this idea that I don't belong in spaces where I've worked so hard to be. Like today, at the gate, the way I was treated. It's exhausting. You'd think after all these years I'd be immune to it." Mrs. Gwendolyn studied her for a moment, her gaze soft but piercing. "Child, they'll always try to make you feel small, try to tell you that you're not enough, that you don't belong, but you know the truth, don't you?" Janelle nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "The truth is," Mrs. Gwendolyn continued, her voice steady, "you don't need to fight like them. You don't need to stoop to their level to prove anything. You fight like you, with dignity, with grace. That's the true power. I've lived long enough to know that grace is the weapon they fear the most." Janelle looked at the woman, her heart racing. "But Doesn't it ever get tiring? Not fighting back, not showing them that I've earned my place, just silently. Taking it? Mrs. Gwendolyn smiled gently, her eyes bright with wisdom. Of course it's tiring, baby. It's tiring every damn day. But fighting like them, shouting, screaming, only exhausts your spirit. And trust me, they'll never hear you when you shout. They'll only hear you when you rise above them. You let them see the strength they can't touch, Janelle thought. About the sting from Carla's earlier rejection, the way the flight attendant had offered champagne to everyone in first class. Except her. The slight was subtle, but it hit deep. The entire cabin had watched. No one had said a word. It was as though she didn't exist. Mrs. Gwendolyn's voice broke through her thoughts. You see, darling, they want to make you invisible. They want you to feel small, like you're not meant to be here. But we're not invisible. They just pretend we are. Janelle's chest tightened at those words. They were so true, so painfully true. It wasn't just Carla or the passengers on the plane. It was everywhere. Boardrooms, offices, elevators. She had spent her whole life fighting to be seen, to make sure she mattered. She looked at the elderly woman, wondering how she had reached this place of calm acceptance. How did you do it? She asked quietly. How did you keep your strength when the world kept trying to strip it from you? Mrs. Gwendolyn's smile deepened, her eyes clouded with memories of her own. I didn't always keep it. Some days I was just as tired as you. But then I realized that my worth wasn't about them seeing me. It was about me seeing myself. I had to learn how to stand tall, even when they tried to make me bow. Janelle closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of Mrs. Gwendolyn's words sink in. She wanted to believe that kind of peace, that kind of quiet strength. But today it felt like fire was burning inside of her. Not grace. The injustice, the dismissals, the small but constant humiliations. They were too much. Do you ever wonder if grace is enough? Janelle asked, her voice low. Or is it time to fight fire with fire? Mrs. Gwendolyn's gaze softened, but she didn't rush to answer. Instead, she reached over and gently squeezed Janelle's hand. I think you'll know when it's time, darling. But until then, don't let them rob you of your power. You already have everything you need, you just have to remember who you are. Janelle exhaled slowly, the weight on her shoulders easing just a little. She still wasn't sure which path she would take, but Mrs. Gwendolyn's words felt like a light in the dark, a reminder that her fight wasn't just about being seen. It was about being true to herself. The turbulence of the flight had calmed. The plane glided through the air, smooth and steady. And for the first time that day, Janelle felt a small flicker of peace. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels skimming the runway with a steady hum. Janelle's grip on the armrest loosened as the flight. Attendant's announcement echoed through the cabin. The seatbelt sign flickered off, and passengers stirred, eager to disembark. The tension in the air seemed to lift as the plane settled into the gate, but for Janelle, it only thickened. As the aisle began to clear, Carla stood in the front, arms folded, her face tight. Janelle glanced toward the flight attendant and noticed the subtle but deliberate shift in Carla's posture. She could feel the other woman's eyes on her as she began to gather her things. Ma'am, Carla called stiffly, her voice cutting through the buzz of departing passengers. Please wait. Priority exit only. Janelle's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't look at Carla. She simply nodded and gathered her things, moving at a slow pace. As much as the subtle command annoyed her, she wouldn't let Carla see her agitation. She had dealt with this kind of dismissive behavior all her life. Small, calculated slights meant to remind her that she didn't belong in certain spaces. A few moments passed in tense silence as Janelle stood, waiting for the rush of passengers to clear. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She was ready to put the flight behind her, to step into LA and face whatever was waiting for her there. Business meetings, phone calls, and the next step in the deal with Everglide. But for now, the sharp sting of Carla's words lingered. Just as the last of the first-class passengers gathered their bags and moved toward the exit, the door to the jet bridge opened, and a small group of well-dressed men and women stepped onto the plane. Janelle barely glanced at them until one figure caught her eye: Thomas Blake, the CEO of Everglide. Her pulse quickened as he walked through the cabin toward her, his stride confident, the air around him calm and assertive. He wore a tailored suit, his smile genuine but professional. The moment his eyes locked with hers, Janelle felt a shift in the atmosphere. "Ma'am," Blake greeted her warmly, his voice smooth and deep. "Welcome. We're honored to have you with us." For a heartbeat, the plane seemed to still. Carla, standing near the front, stiffened. Her eyes widened as she looked between Janelle and Blake, then quickly averted her gaze. The silence in the cabin deepened. Janelle could almost hear the sharp intake of breath from the surrounding passengers. The same people who had just moments before looked through her, dismissed her, now watched as Blake, the CEO of a massive company, spoke to her as though she were the most important person in the room. Carla's face turned pale, her mouth slightly agape, but she said nothing. Janelle stood tall, but a quiet satisfaction stirred within her. She held out her hand, meeting Blake's firm grasp. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," Janelle said, her voice steady but warm. Blake's smile widened. "The pleasure's mine," he replied. As they shook hands, the weight of Carla's earlier dismissal hung in the air, thickening the silence. The other passengers, who had been watching the scene unfold, seemed to hold their breath, unsure of what was happening. Then, without missing a beat, Blake turned slightly, toward Janelle, his voice calm but undeniably official. "Everglide is officially yours now," he said, his words carrying an unspoken gravity. Janelle's heart skipped a beat, but her expression didn't change. She gave a small nod, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Blake's words echoed in her mind as she stood there, poised and calm. Everglide, one of the most powerful companies in the sector, was hers. The company that had once been a distant dream, a place she had only ever dared to imagine owning, was now a reality. She turned her gaze to Carla, who stood frozen in place, her face an odd mixture of shock and regret. The flight attendant had no words, no retort. She simply stood there, caught in the silence of her own making. Janelle didn't say anything further. She didn't need to. The moment was enough. She turned to Blake, her hand still in his. "Shall we?" she asked, her voice composed. Blake smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Absolutely, after you, ma'am." And just like that, the flight attendant's cold dismissal, her reminder that Janelle didn't belong in spaces like these, was wiped away. The very man who held the power to make or break companies now stood at her side, acknowledging her presence, her strength. The silence in the air had shifted, but this time, it was a silence of respect. The terminal was buzzing with activity as Janelle walked alongside CEO Thomas Blake, a calm confidence in her steps. The bright lights overhead cast long shadows, but she felt no hesitation, no fear. Blake walked beside her, his usual authoritative demeanor softened in her presence, as if he knew this moment, this tour, was as much a declaration of her leadership as it was a welcome to the company she now owned. Carla trailed behind them at a discreet distance, her eyes darting between Janelle and the ground, unsure of what to do next. Every step she took seemed to deepen the weight of her earlier mistake. She had tried to push Janelle into a box, to dismiss her as unimportant. But now, in the presence of Blake and the quiet confidence that radiated from Janelle, she saw the truth. Janelle turned to Blake with a smile, gesturing to the bustling terminal around them. "This is where it all starts, the heartbeat of the company," Blake nodded, his gaze sweeping over the operations staff at their stations, pilots preparing for their next flights, and the cabin crew moving about in preparation for the evening's journeys. The air was thick with the organized chaos of an airport, but Janelle walked through it as though she belonged in every corner of it, her feet firmly planted in each space she moved through. They passed by the operations team, and Janelle stopped to shake hands with each one. She greeted them by name, asking about their day and their families, a stark contrast to the quick, impersonal nods they were used to receiving from upper management. Blake followed her lead, his warm smile matching hers. Though it was clear that the relationships Janelle had forged with these employees were built on years of experience. They moved past the gate area, stopping for a moment as Janelle spoke with one of the pilots preparing for a flight to Chicago. The man's face lit up when she approached, and she offered a handshake that was firm but friendly. "It's good to see you, Captain. How's the family?" "Everyone's well, Miss Carter. Thank you for asking." The pilot responded with a grin, clearly taken aback that the new owner of the company would take such an interest. Blake watched the exchange with interest. Janelle's ability to connect, to make everyone in the room feel important, was a sharp contrast to the often cold, transactional nature of corporate leadership. As they continued their tour, Janelle paused as they neared a janitor pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. The man, an older black employee, wore his uniform with pride, but there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke volumes about the nature of his work that was often overlooked, even disrespected. Janelle stopped in front of him, offering a genuine smile. "Hey there, sir, what's your name?" The man blinked, startled by the attention, but quickly recovered. "Marcus, ma'am." "Marcus," Janelle repeated, her voice soft and warm. "Thank you for all the work you do. It doesn't go unnoticed." The janitor gave a nod, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're welcome, ma'am. Just doing my job." Janelle turned to Blake, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Every part of this house matters," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Every person, every role." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "I've never heard it put quite like that before." Before Janelle could respond, Carla stepped forward hesitantly. She cleared her throat, her voice apologetic but laced with a hint of discomfort. "Ms. Carter, I just wanted to apologize for earlier. Janelle turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "We'll talk. At the right time," she said calmly, her voice carrying no malice, only a quiet understanding. Carla's face flushed, and she nodded stiffly. She had said her piece, but it was clear that her apology hadn't erased the silent distance that had grown between them. As the group continued through the terminal, Janelle couldn't help but notice the glances from employees, some filled with curiosity, others with respect. She had been on the other side of these interactions before, invisible, dismissed, pushed aside. But now she was the one being watched, being acknowledged, and the weight of it was both humbling and empowering. Her hand brushed the golden pin on her lapel, a simple, elegant piece of jewelry, shaped like a dove. It was the one her mother had worn to church every Sunday, a symbol of grace, of quiet strength, and of resilience. Her mother had never flown on a plane, never traveled far from home. But Janelle had always carried her mother's wisdom in her heart. "You'll walk in rooms they think you were sent to clean," her grandmother had told her when she was young. Janelle smiled softly to herself, the weight of that lesson settling in her bones. She wasn't just in those rooms now. She owned them. Weeks had passed since Janelle had first walked through the terminal at gate A12. Then she had been an unexpected guest. Now she was an invited speaker, a force of transformation. It was surreal, walking back to that same gate, but this time the air felt different. The weight of her journey wasn't just about the corporate victory. It was about changing the narrative, about rewriting the rules of an industry that hadn't been designed for someone like her. The terminal was abuzz with the announcement of the press conference. Reporters stood near the ropes, camera lenses pointed at her as she made her way to the podium. Carla, who had been reassigned after the earlier debacle, now wore a neutral expression as she observed from the back of the room. She had no place in this moment, and Janelle knew she wouldn't be forgotten, but her place was no longer where she had once stood. Gwendolyn was there too, standing proudly in the front row, her elderly presence like an anchor in the sea of chaos around them. She had come a long way since their flight, her words still echoing in Janelle's mind. Gwendolyn was the reason Janelle had walked through the door of Everglide with quiet grace, but now she had learned how to fight like herself, without apology. Janelle took her place at the podium, the click of the microphones a sharp reminder of the eyes upon her. The lights felt warm on her skin, but it was the faces in the crowd that made her breath steady. She scanned the room, then focused on the crowd before her. "This isn't about revenge," Janelle began, her voice steady but filled with an energy that had been building for years. "It's about restoration. It's about making this company look like the world outside, diverse, inclusive, a place where everyone belongs no matter where they start or who they are." Her words resonated in the room. The reporters scribbled on their notepads, capturing each word with intensity. But Janelle wasn't speaking for the cameras. She wasn't speaking for the people who might later dissect her speech in some corporate boardroom. She was speaking to the person she had once been, the girl who had been pushed aside, told she didn't belong. "The changes we're making," Janelle continued, her gaze sweeping over the reporters, "are about more than just policy. It's about opportunity. It's about ensuring that no one, especially people of color, ever have to fight their way in the way I did. We will be rolling out new equity hiring initiatives, leadership changes that reflect our values, and we will continue to build a company that offers real careers, not just jobs." The camera flashes were relentless now, blinding, but they didn't faze her. She wasn't the story. "Change is," she said simply, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "That's the story." As the crowd buzzed with questions, Janelle kept it short. She didn't need to stay long. The message had been delivered. As reporters packed up their equipment and the cameras began to shift away, Janelle's eyes wandered across the terminal, her gaze resting on a young black girl standing near the coffee stand. The girl looked no older than 11, her wide eyes fixed on Janelle with a mixture of awe and curiosity. She was alone, clutching a small backpack to her chest as she watched the scene unfold. Janelle caught her eye, and for a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. The little girl saw her, not as a CEO, not as the woman who had just rewritten the rules. She saw her as someone who had once stood in her shoes, watching others take their place, wondering if she could ever have a chance. Janelle smiled gently at her, a soft but powerful connection that spoke volumes. "Next time, take the front seat," she said, her voice a quiet promise. The girl blinked, as if processing the words. Then, her face lit up in a shy, hopeful smile. For Janelle, it was everything she needed. The press conference, the new initiatives, all of it was secondary. This moment, this exchange, was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Janelle turned to Blake, who had quietly observed from the side. His expression was one of respect, but also admiration. He knew she had earned this, and more. "You did good," he said, voice low, as they walked away from the podium together. She didn't need his validation, but hearing it made the weight of everything fall away. The next step was already here. Restoration was just beginning, and this was only the first chapter. Janelle stood by the large windows of her office, watching the planes rise from the tarmac. Each one seemed to defy gravity, cutting through the air as they climbed higher and higher, toward destinations unknown. She felt a strange sense of peace as she observed the steady rhythm of the flights, the takeoffs, the landings, the promise of somewhere new. It wasn't just the planes themselves that fascinated her. It was the journey, the power of movement, of progress. Power. She had spent so many years chasing it, thinking it was about control, about commanding rooms, commanding people, demanding respect. But now, she understood that true power wasn't about control at all. It was about choice, the freedom to choose your path, your direction, your destination. Her fingers gently grazed the glass, her reflection mingling with the view of the plains outside. The life she had built, everything she had fought for, had come with sacrifices. But now, she realized, she was in control of her own choices. It wasn't about making others bow before her. It was about standing tall enough that no one could knock her down again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She picked it up, her eyes still on the plains outside as she answered. "Hello?" she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the day's reflection. "Hi, Aunt Janelle," came the bright, eager voice of her niece. "I was wondering, can I come visit you at your office sometime soon? I want to learn what you do. I want to see what it's like." Janelle felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her niece had always been curious, always asked the hard questions, the questions that adults often dismissed. She smiled, her eyes softening as she thought of the young girl, full of dreams, full of hope. The same hope that had once filled her own heart when she was a child, staring out into the world and wondering if she would ever be able to carve her own space in it. "You want to learn what I do, huh?" Janelle chuckled, her heart full. "Well, if you want to see it up close, I guess you'd better fly first class." There was a pause on the other end, and then her niece laughed, the sound of it bright and innocent. "First class? Really?" Janelle's smile widened. "Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way. You've earned it." "Okay, Aunt Janelle, I'll be there." Janelle set the phone down and returned to the window, her gaze now softer, more reflective. She had made it. But more than that, she had created a world where the next generation could soar higher than she ever could. A world where young girls like her niece wouldn't have to fight as hard for the same opportunities. A world where they could start at the front, not the back. She turned away from the window, her eyes falling on the framed scarf hanging on the wall of her office. The soft fabric, once her mother's, now rested as a symbol of everything that had brought Janelle here. It had once draped her mother's shoulders, a modest token of the woman who had worked tirelessly, never asking for more, always giving. The scarf was more than just a memento now. It was a reminder of where she had come from, the sacrifices her mother had made for her, and the faith that had carried them both through life's darkest moments. Janelle walked over to it, running her fingers gently along the edges. The small gold frame reflected the light softly, almost as if the scarf itself were glowing. "Flight begins with faith," the inscription read. It had been her mother's favorite saying, passed down from the old church her mother had attended. It was a phrase Janelle had carried with her in her heart for years, but now it held a new meaning. It wasn't just about faith in God, it was about faith in herself, faith in the steps she had taken to rise, to overcome, and to lead. Janelle stood in front of it, her reflection in the glass beside her. She had come a long way from the woman who had been dismissed, ignored, and told she didn't belong. And now she knew. She belonged not because others had made space for her, but because she had built her own. The phone rang again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Another meeting. But for now, she let it ring. There were more important things to focus on. The planes outside continued their ascent, and Janelle knew, deep in her bones, that the sky was the limit. She had already started her journey, and the only thing left now was to watch the rest of it unfold. The only thing she needed to do was keep believing. Her mother's scarf was the anchor, and Janelle had learned to trust it, and herself, fully. Next, "Stop," she whispered to herself with a smile. "The front seat.